My name is Alex, and for the past 4 years, the hushed, dust-filled labyrinth of the public library has been my sanctuary. I'm an archivist, a keeper of forgotten histories, and, frankly, a bit of a relic myself. While most people see stacks of decaying paper, I see whispers, echoes of lives lived and forgotten. It's a lonely job, perfect for someone like me who finds more comfort in the silent sagas of the past than in the messy clamor of the present. My obsession began subtly, like a hairline crack in a vast pane of glass. It was during a routine accession of a newly donated collection from the old local historical society, mostly mundane town council minutes and faded photographs. But buried beneath a pile of ledgers, I found it. A slim, leather-bound diary, no larger than my hand. It was dated 1887, and its cover bore no title, just a faint pressed indentation, like an absent symbol. Inside, the ink was faded but legible, detailing the daily mundanities of a farmer named Thomas Coldwell. Weather, crop yields, the occasional ailment, until page 47. That's where the entries shifted. Between two innocuous notes about a late frost, a delicate, brittle marshland flower was pressed, its petals the color of dried blood. The subsequent entries grew frantic, the handwriting sloping wildly. "The silence that takes," Thomas wrote, "the shapes in the bog mist." And then, repeated twice on the same page, a disturbing symbol. A jagged, incomplete circle with 3 radiating lines, drawn in what looked disturbingly like dried, reddish-brown pigment. Not ink, pigment. From what, I didn't want to guess. One phrase, almost scrawled out, caught my eye and sent a chill down my spine. Archive C, lower sub-basement. Archive C. I knew every blueprint, every inventory list, every forgotten nook and cranny of this building. There was no Archive C, certainly not in the sub-basement. Our sub-basement held nothing but the archaic boiler room, some long-condemned storage spaces, and service tunnels no one had touched in decades. Yet the phrase resonated with an unsettling familiarity, like a half-forgotten dream. My reclusive grandmother, bless her eccentric soul, used to whisper cautionary tales of the fen folk, spectral beings said to dwell in the ancient marshlands outside of town, beings that took people who wandered too close to the old bog when the mist rolled in. My academic curiosity, usually a benign guide, transformed into a consuming inferno. This wasn't just another historical oddity, it felt personal. The symbol in the diary was eerily similar to a recurring fragmented image from my own childhood nightmares, one I'd long ago dismissed as an overactive imagination. Now it was staring back at me from a century-old diary. A burning, desperate need to know took root, eclipsing common sense. It wasn't just a puzzle. It was a compulsion, a self-destructive urge to pull at a thread I instinctively knew could unravel everything I understood about the world. Tonight was my late shift. The library's heavy oak doors had grown shut an hour ago. The silence had settled, profound and absolute, punctuated only by the distant hum of the ancient ventilation system. Clutching Thomas Coldwell's diary, its brittle pages threatening to crumble in my grip, I made my way to the service elevator, the one that hadn't been inspected in 20 years. Its rusted cage rattled as it slowly, reluctantly descended into the pitch-black maw of the sub-basement. A cold, damp breath seemed to seep up from below, carrying with it the metallic tang of old iron and something else, something indescribably ancient and wrong. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, but my feet kept moving. I had to find Archive C. I had to know. The ancient service elevator groaned, a prolonged dying sigh, as its rusted cage shuddered to a halt. The air that seeped in from the sub-basement was a physical assault, thick with the metallic tang of old iron and something else, something cloyingly sweet and putrescent, like forgotten flowers left to rot in stagnant water. My flashlight beam, a nervous tremor in my hand, cut through the absolute darkness, revealing sweating pipes draped in cobwebs, skeletal shadows of industrial relics, and the damp earthen floor. This was the sub-basement I knew, concrete, rebar, a mausoleum of forgotten machinery. But Thomas Caldwell's diary gnawed at me. Archive C, lower sub-basement. I moved through the labyrinth of disused storage, the clamor of my own breathing echoing too loudly in the profound silence. Every shadow seemed to stretch and contort, mimicking these shapes in the bog mist Caldwell had feared. I traced the perimeter, shining my light into every alcove, every forgotten corner. Nothing. Just the familiar, oppressive reality of the library's foundations. Frustration coiled in my gut, hot and bitter. Was it a delusion? A metaphor? Then, near the boiler room, tucked away behind a collapsed shelving unit, I saw it. Not a door, not a room, but a rupture. A section of the concrete wall where it met the uneven earth floor seemed to have receded, as if the very stone had given way to something pressing behind it. The edges were uneven, raw, almost organic, ringed with a dark, glistening residue. A cold breath, far colder than the ambient temperature, ghosted over my face from the opening. It carried with it not the industrial stench of this level, but the rich, heavy perfume of decaying leaves, wet soil, and something indescribably ancient, like earth, breathing after a millennia of slumber. My flashlight beam pierced the narrow gap, revealing not another concrete passage, but a constricted, almost geological fissure descending into utter blackness. The floor within was no longer concrete, but a soft, yielding muck that squelched under my shoe. And then I saw it, etched into the damp, crumbling rock face just inside the fissure, barely visible beneath a film of viscous moisture, the jagged, incomplete circle with 3 radiating lines, drawn in what looked disturbingly like reactivated rust, or perhaps something far older and more vital. A low, resonant thrum began, originating from deep within the fissure, a sound so primordial it vibrated in my teeth. It was not a mechanical hum, but something alive, elemental, like the slow pulse of the earth itself. The air grew heavy, thick with moisture, and as I stepped fully into the impossible passage, a wispy, ethereal mist began to curl around my ankles, blooming from the unseen depths. This wasn't a library archive. This was a vein leading into the heart of the Fen folks' domain, a place that defied architect and cartographer alike. My every instinct screamed to retreat, to run, but the thrumming in the earth now matched the frantic beat of my own heart, pulling me deeper, a terrible, magnetic force. I had to know what lay beyond the mist. I had to. The thrumming intensified with each step, a deep, resonant pulse that no longer felt like the earth's heartbeat, but something far more intimate, a vibration in my very bones. The air, heavy and cloying, clung to my skin like a damp shroud, growing colder, yet somehow suffocating. The mist, previously a gentle curl around my ankles, now billowed, dense and phosphorescent, reducing visibility to mere feet. It wasn't just water vapor, it tasted metallic, like ozone and old blood, and it carried with it the ghost of that putrescent sweetness, now sickeningly strong, like 1,000 marshland flowers rotting at once. The fissure narrowed, then widened into a low-ceilinged cavern. My flashlight beams struggled against the swirling mist, revealing not rock walls, but a grotesque tapestry of intertwining roots, thick as my arm, glistening with a viscous film. They didn't just line the cavern, they were the cavern, forming organic arches and supports, their surfaces textured like ancient, petrified wood, but with an unsettling, almost imperceptible flex. The ground beneath my feet squelched, a thick black muck that felt too soft, too yielding. I was no longer in the library's foundations. I was deep within something else, something alive and impossibly old. Then, through a sudden rift in the mist, I saw them. Not shelves, not cabinets, but a series of vertical root-like structures branching upwards from the floor like spectral trees, each gnarled branch ending in a hollowed-out alcove. And within these alcoves, nestled carefully as if preserved, were objects, small personal effects, a tarnished silver locket, a child's wooden toy, a spectacles case, its leather warped by time. And in one, directly before me, a small leather-bound book, its cover faded, but undeniably familiar. Thomas Caldwell's diary slipped from my nerveless fingers, splashing into the muck. The book in the alcove was identical. My breath caught, a cold knot in my chest. Reaching out with a trembling hand, I retrieved it. This wasn't a copy. It was his diary, the one I'd been clutching moments before. The pages were damp but legible, open to page 47. The delicate blood-red marshland flower was still pressed between the leaves, the jagged, incomplete circle with 3 radiating lines. It was all there, exactly as I remembered. Yet I held 2 copies, the one I'd carried, now slick with muck, and this one, pristine within its root alcove. My mind reeled. How? The mist swirled with renewed vigor, coalescing at the edge of my limited vision. Shapes, not amorphous blobs, but suggestions of forms, tall and slender, barely discernible, yet undeniably present. The thrumming deepened, vibrating now not just in my bones, but in my very skull, drowning out thought. A profound, aching cold settled within my chest, drawing the heat from my limbs. I felt lighter somehow, less substantial. And then a whisper, not from the mist, but from within the pristine diary. A sound like dry leaves skittering across forgotten stone, forming a single, horrifyingly clear word. "Welcome, Alex." The symbol carved into the root alcove directly above the diary pulsed. A faint reddish-brown light emanated from its lines, a sickly organic glow. It wasn't rust, it was something else. Something living. "Welcome, Alex." The words were a sibilant caress against my ear, echoing not just in the air, but in the deepest, most guarded chambers of my mind. A cold dread, far more profound than the cavern's chill, bloomed in my chest. The feeling of being less substantial intensified, a terrifying hollowness unfurling from my core, as if my very essence were being thinned, drawn out like wisps of smoke. My mucky, familiar diary lay forgotten in the yielding sludge, an anchor to a reality that was rapidly dissolving. My gaze, now unfathomably heavy, fixed on the pristine diary in the root alcove. It radiated a peculiar warmth, almost inviting. I felt an irresistible pull, a compulsion to reach for it, a terrible echo of the need that had driven me into this impossible place. As my trembling fingers brushed its smooth, unnervingly new-feeling cover, the jagged symbol above it pulsed with a violent reddish-brown light, bathing the cavern in a sickly, organic glow that seemed to seep into my very bones. Around me, the swirling mist coalesced further. The shapes I'd glimpsed sharpened, becoming disturbingly distinct. Tall, slender forms woven from vapor and root, yet in their insubstantiality I could almost discern the faint, fleeting contours of forgotten faces, hollowed and elongated, trapped in the swirling fog. These weren't spectral beings of ancient lore. They were shells, the horrific remains of those who had succumbed. They were the Fenfolk. The knowledge, a chilling shard of ice, pierced through the fog of my fading mind. My grandmother's whispers had been wrong, terribly wrong. They didn't merely take people, they became them. Or rather, the people became them.
A searing pain, more intense than the last, erupted behind my eyes. This time, it wasn't a specific memory, but a concept, a fundamental pillar of who I was. The weight of my own name, Alex, its sound, its meaning, its connection to my entire life began to fray at the edges, dissolving into the metallic tang of the mist. A primal scream, wordless and desperate, tried to tear itself from my throat, but only a choked gasp escaped. I was losing myself, piece by agonizing piece. The terror was absolute, but with it came a strange, horrifying resignation. My hand, suddenly not my own, lifted. The pristine diary, heavy and demanding, was guided to the muck-stained page. I tried to resist, tried to clench my fingers, to throw the cursed book into the black sludge, but my muscles responded with a terrifying indifference. The crimson glow from the symbol above intensified, bathing the cavern in a sickening organic luminescence, and a single wet finger of root, glistening with viscous residue, seemed to stretch from the symbol, brushing against the diary's cover. A profound chill, deeper than anything I had ever known, settled in my heart. Then, with a slow, agonizing deliberation, my index finger moved. It poised over the blank page, not for me to write, but to receive. The tip of my finger began to bleed, not blood, but a reddish-brown ichor, the same sickening pigment I had seen in Caldwell's diary, the same that stained the symbol. It dripped onto the page, and my hand began to move, compelled by an unseen force. The first word, meticulously penned in my own fading archivist's hand, appeared on the page. It wasn't oblivion, nor welcome, but a chilling, detached observation, a command from the entity, now spoken through me, inscribed on the fresh canvas of my own undoing. The archiving begins. The archiving begins. My finger, guided by an invisible, relentless will, traced the first letters onto the blank page. The ichor, no longer just a bleeding pigment, but a living conduit, flowed with an unsettling warmth, solidifying into precise, elegant script. My archivist's hand, meticulous even in its utter subjugation, began to record. Accession record
Alex, Archivist, Public Library, Town of Oak Haven. Primary attachment, the library. Memory cluster, labyrinthine stacks, dust motes dancing in sunbeams, scent of aged paper and forgotten ink. Sanction for removal, primary identity anchor. Chronology, past 4 years. As the words formed, a profound cold seized my mind, an echoing void where the very concept of the library had resided. My sanctuary, my home, the quiet solace of its towering shelves and whispering pages. Gone. I tried to recall the feel of a worn leather binding, the precise layout of the periodical section, the way the light fell through the arched windows in the afternoon. Nothing. Only a formless, aching blankness. A part of my soul, neatly categorized and filed away, no longer belonged to me. The weight of the diary grew heavier, as if absorbing the mass of my stolen memories. The reddish-brown glow from the symbol above intensified, pulsing in time with the resonant thrumming, which now felt less like an external force and more like my own unraveling consciousness. The slender forms in the mist solidified further, their faceless visages tilting, almost attentive. They were not merely observing, they were feeding. With each memory meticulously transcribed, a wisp of vapor seemed to detach from my fading form and drift toward them, thickening their ghostly outlines. My finger moved again, without volition. The next entry. Accession record, Alex, Archivist, Secondary attachment, Grandmother, Eleanor, Memory cluster, Bedtime stories, Fenfolk cautionary tales, Warmth by the hearth, Sanctioned for removal, Childhood anchor, Chronology, Earliest recollections to present. A scream, raw and visceral, tried to tear from my chest, but it was not my own voice. It was a dry, rustling sound, like desiccated leaves caught in a sudden draught. The loss of grandmother was already a wound, but this was the active mutilation of the memory, the precise extraction of the pain. The very concept of grandmother became an empty word, devoid of warmth or history, an academic term in a forgotten lexicon. The tales of the Fenfolk, once a chilling warning, now felt like a cruel joke. I understood, with a horrifying clarity that ripped through the lingering fog of my mind, what the Archive C truly was. It wasn't a collection of documents. It was an archive of souls, of lived experience, meticulously categorized and consumed, leaving behind only the shells, the FEN, sustained by the stolen essences of new victims. Each diary was not merely a record of a life, but the container for its stolen fragments. The C stood not for Caldwell, but for consumption, or perhaps containment. I glanced desperately at the other root alcoves, the ones holding tarnished knocket cases and warped spectacles cases. Each one, I now understood, held a diary like mine, an archive of someone else's oblivion. And in the alcove directly adjacent to where my own pristine diary lay, my eyes, now wide and unblinking, focused on another book. Its cover was aged, its binding cracked. It was Thomas Caldwell's diary, the real one, the one I had found. Its pages were open, not to page 47, but to the very last page. And scrawled there, in a wild, desperate hand, was the same jagged, incomplete circle with 3 radiating lines, but this one was different. It wasn't a symbol of the FEN. It was a desperate, inverted attempt at a ward, a final futile gesture of defiance against the very process it marked.
and beneath it a single horrifying word, not of welcome, but of warning, written in blood-red ichor, echoing my own stolen fate. They take the words, and with them, you. The symbol above me pulsed violently, its reddish-brown light intensifying, searing itself onto my retinas. The thrumming became deafening, a cacophony of lost voices, of vanishing identities. My hand, still compelled, continued to write. The words blurred, losing their meaning, becoming mere shapes. The hollow ache in my chest was all that remained, growing exponentially. I was no longer Alex. I was an empty vessel, a scrivener of my own disappearance, the last act of a fading self. The pristine diary was nearly full, and on the final page, I knew with a chilling certainty, waited the ultimate accession. The accession of Alex itself.